Good morning. Today marks a pivotal moment in American legal and political history. On November 5, 2025, the Supreme Court convened to hear a case that could fundamentally reshape the balance of power between the branches of government. The outcome of this case may not only redefine presidential authority, but also have a direct impact on the daily lives and finances of millions of Americans. At the heart of the case are President Trump's sweeping tariffs, which were imposed on imports from nearly every country around the globe. These tariffs have affected a wide range of goods, from electronics and clothing to raw materials and food products, touching nearly every sector of the U.S. economy. For hours, the nation's top government lawyers faced off against a determined coalition of small businesses, state representatives, and advocacy groups. The central question: did the president exceed his constitutional authority by enacting these tariffs without explicit approval from Congress? The courtroom was tense, with justices pressing both sides on the limits of executive power. The challengers argue that these tariffs are devastating small businesses, pushing many to the brink of bankruptcy. Owners describe rising costs, shrinking profit margins, and the painful decision to lay off workers or even close their doors. They insist that only Congress has the constitutional authority to impose taxes on Americans or regulate trade with foreign nations. Allowing the president to act alone, they warn, undermines the checks and balances at the core of American democracy. The administration, on the other hand, defends the tariffs as essential tools for protecting national security and supporting American industries. They argue that swift executive action is sometimes necessary to respond to global threats and economic challenges. Throughout the proceedings, justices from across the ideological spectrum expressed deep concern about the potential consequences of granting any president unchecked power over trade and taxation. They questioned what limits, if any, should exist on executive authority in matters that affect the entire nation. The decision the court reaches will ripple through every corner of American life. It will influence the prices we pay at the store, the fate of countless businesses, and the strength of America's relationships with trading partners around the world. Ultimately, the outcome of this landmark case will set a precedent for presidential power that could last for generations, shaping the future of American governance and the everyday lives of its citizens. Let's break down tariffs and understand why they play such a crucial role in the global economy. Tariffs are more than just a line item on a government spreadsheet. They shape the way countries trade, influence what we buy, and even impact the prices we see every day. At their core, a tariff is a tax placed on goods that are brought into a country from abroad. When a foreign product arrives in the U.S., the government adds a fee, making that item more expensive for American consumers. The idea is to encourage people to buy products made in the U.S. instead, supporting local businesses and jobs. But tariffs don't just affect shoppers. They ripple through the entire economy, from manufacturers to retailers to families at home. In early 2025, President Trump's administration made headlines by imposing a sweeping set of tariffs. The first targets were major trading partners like China, Mexico, and Canada. But soon, the policy expanded to cover nearly all imports, affecting everything from electronics and clothing to food and machinery. This marked one of the most aggressive uses of tariffs in recent U.S. history. The administration justified these actions by pointing to the nation's trade deficit, the gap between what America imports and what it exports. Officials argued that this deficit threatened national security and American jobs, making tariffs a necessary tool to protect the country's interests. Tariffs started at 10% on certain goods, but quickly escalated. For some countries and products, the rates soared as high as 50%. This sudden increase sent shockwaves through global supply chains, forcing companies to rethink where and how they sourced their products. The financial impact was immediate. In just 6 months, the U.S. government collected a staggering $151 billion in tariffs, a 300% jump from the previous year. While this brought in revenue, it also meant higher costs for businesses and consumers alike. For the average American family, these tariffs translated into real dollars. Everyday items, from groceries to household goods, became more expensive. On average, households saw their annual expenses rise by about $1,800, putting extra strain on budgets already stretched by inflation and other economic pressures. Small businesses, often operating on thin margins, faced tough decisions. Should they absorb the extra costs and risk going under, or raise prices and potentially lose loyal customers? For many, neither option was sustainable, leading to layoffs, closures, or desperate attempts to find new suppliers. The challenge was even greater for those who relied on specialized parts or materials that simply weren't available domestically. Many business owners said they had no choice but to pay the higher prices, making it harder to compete and threatening their survival. As frustration grew, business groups and trade associations began to organize, voicing their concerns in the media and at public forums. They argued that the tariffs were doing more harm than good, hurting American workers and consumers instead of helping them. Ultimately, some businesses decided to take their fight to the highest court in the land. They challenged the tariffs before the Supreme Court, claiming the policy was not only damaging to their livelihoods, but also unconstitutional. The outcome of this legal battle could reshape how America approaches trade for years to come. At the heart of the case is a constitutional clash. The challengers point to Article 1, Section 8, which gives Congress, not the President, the power to tax and regulate foreign commerce. They argue tariffs are taxes, and only Congress can impose them. By declaring an emergency and acting alone, the President bypassed the legislative process and public debate. The challengers warn this sets a dangerous precedent, concentrating too much power in one office. Some justices seem troubled by Congress potentially giving away its core duties. The challengers aren't against all tariffs, they just want the process to follow the Constitution. They're asking the court to restore the balance of power as the framers intended. The Trump administration's legal defense in this case centers on a powerful law known as the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. This act, passed by Congress in 1977, was designed to give the president broad authority to respond to extraordinary threats to the nation's security, especially those originating from outside the United States. Under IEEPA, once the president declares a national emergency, he or she can regulate, restrict, or even prohibit a wide range of international economic transactions. This includes freezing assets, blocking trade, and imposing restrictions on foreign investments. The law was originally intended for situations like terrorism, hostile foreign governments, or major international crises. In this case, the administration argues that the growing U.S. trade deficit poses a serious and unusual threat to the country's economic stability and national security. They claim that tariffs imposed on foreign goods are not simply taxes on imports, but rather regulatory tools used to address these threats and rebalance international commerce. According to the government, the revenue generated from these tariffs is merely a side effect. The true intention, they say, is to put pressure on foreign governments to negotiate fairer trade deals and to protect vital American industries, such as steel and manufacturing, from unfair competition abroad. Officials warn that if the president's emergency powers under IEEPA are limited or taken away, the United States could be left vulnerable and unable to act swiftly in the face of sudden global threats, whether economic, political, or even military in nature. What makes this case especially significant is that it marks the first time IEEPA has been invoked to justify such sweeping tariffs on a broad range of goods, rather than targeted sanctions. The outcome could set a major precedent for how much power the president has in times of crisis. Now, the administration is asking the Supreme Court to uphold the president's wide latitude to act in emergencies, arguing that strong executive authority is essential for protecting the nation's interests in an unpredictable world. Surprisingly, conservative justices expressed sharp skepticism. Chief Justice Roberts worried about limitless presidential authority. Could any product, any country, any time be targeted? Justice Gorsuch questioned whether Congress was surrendering its constitutional responsibilities. The justices probed for limits to prevent abuse of power. Even Justice Barrett raised concerns about the practical chaos of unwinding the tariffs. Their skepticism signals a tough road for the administration's argument. The liberal justices also doubted the administration's position, focusing on the real-world impact. Justice Sotomayor challenged the idea that tariffs aren't taxes, pointing to the billions collected. The liberals saw the tariffs as a massive tax program imposed without Congress. They questioned whether such a financial burden should be decided by the executive alone. Both wings of the court seemed united in concern over unchecked presidential power. The justices' bipartisan skepticism suggests the government's arguments fell flat. Many observers believe the court is looking for a way to rein in executive overreach. The court's decision will have immediate sweeping consequences. If the tariffs are struck down, The government could owe up to $750 billion in refunds, a logistical nightmare. This could blow a hole in the federal budget, forcing tough choices on spending or taxes. For families and businesses, ending the tariffs could mean lower prices and relief from inflation. Small businesses could become more competitive and invest in growth. But U.S. industries protected by tariffs, like steel, could face renewed foreign competition and job losses. The administration warns this would undermine its America First agenda. A ruling against the government would force a major shift in trade policy and presidential authority. Even if the administration loses, the tariff fight isn't over. The White House is preparing alternative legal strategies to keep tariffs in place, signaling a prolonged battle. Businesses may face ongoing uncertainty as new legal justifications are tested in court. President Trump has framed the case as a fight for national survival, vowing not to back down. If the court limits presidential power, Congress may have to act, either granting more authority or imposing stricter limits. This could spark a fierce national debate over trade and the separation of powers. In a divided Washington, finding consensus will be a major challenge. The Supreme Court's decision on the Trump tariffs is about more than one policy. It's about the future of American democracy. The justices must decide who holds the ultimate power to tax and shape the economy, the president or Congress. Upholding the tariffs could expand executive power and keep prices high. Striking them down could bring relief but create budget and industry challenges. The court's bipartisan skepticism shows a deep concern for checks and balances. This case tests the very foundations of our government. The ruling will shape America's economy and democracy for years to come. As we await the decision, one thing is clear. Its impact will be felt by every American.